Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a huge topic, the new science behind how we train police officers for what might be the single most critical moment of their entire careers, a use-of-force encounter. And really, it all boils down to this one question. It's the central challenge. The entire field of modern training exists to answer this one incredibly difficult question. And to even begin to find an answer, you first have to understand the immense pressure of the moment itself. So, let's get right into it. The crucial thing you've got to realize is that under fire, the human brain, it just works differently. And this isn't about courage or willpower. We're talking about pure biology and the raw physics of a violent encounter. So what does this number actually mean for an officer on the street? Well, in a close quarters ambush, this is the reaction time disadvantage an officer's up against. Think about that. To fire at the exact same time as an attacker, the officer would have needed to start drawing their weapon a full second before the suspect even moved. It's a race you're forced to start from behind. Because of that time disadvantage, there's just no luxury for slow, analytical thought. Instead, legal research shows that officers default to this: naturalistic decision-making. It's basically a fancier way of saying you have to rely on your gut instinct, on pattern recognition. You make the call based on what your training has burned into your reflexes.
And the cognitive overload, the sheer stress, is so intense that really basic stuff can just vanish. We're talking about documented cases where officers couldn't even recall their own partner's name in the heat of the moment. And again, this is not a character flaw, it's a fundamental human response to overwhelming danger. And that right there is exactly why training has to be about building reflexes, not just memorizing rules.
Okay, so if the problem is that deep, it's instinctual and incredibly high pressure, then we have to ask a tough question. Are our traditional training methods really up to the task?
This quote from a veteran officer with 8 years on the job. Man, it just gets right to the heart of the critique. For a long time, a lot of training programs were really just about qualification. It was about passing a test, not about actually replicating the pure chaos of a real-world encounter.
And it's not just about realism, is it? There's also the massive cost. Just take a look at this analysis from the U.S. Marine Corps, looking at a 10-year window. It's pretty stark. When you supplement that old-school live-fire training with simulators, you save millions upon millions of dollars, mostly because you're not burning through ammo and you need fewer people to run the training.
So, this really brings us to the new frontier in all of this. Faced with the limits of realism and these staggering costs, agencies are turning to technology to create a whole new kind of training ground. And this is where something like virtual reality really comes into play. It allows you to run through these incredibly high-risk scenarios over and over and over again, but in a totally safe environment. And we have to be clear here, this isn't about playing video games. As a case study from the Abu Dhabi police shows, this is a serious tool for building deeply realistic training capabilities.
You might wonder how they even build these things. Well, it's actually a super collaborative process. They use these agile methods, like one called Scrum, where the officers themselves, the actual practitioners, are involved from the very beginning. This guarantees that the final product isn't just cool tech for tech's sake, it's tactically relevant and actually effective.
So, okay, does it actually work? Well, a study from the UK Ministry of Defense compared different methods for training judgment. And the result? It's crystal clear. The VR simulation, it was just as effective for challenging an officer's decision-making skills as those super expensive live-fire exercises. And that basic 2D video training, yeah, it wasn't even close.
But the evolution here doesn't just stop with the tech. That's just the start.
The most advanced methods now are focusing less on what the hands are doing and more on the brain. Specifically, on training officers to see and process the world just like an expert does.
This is so cool. Eye tracking studies show this really fascinating difference. A novice, their eyes kind of wander all over the place, scanning the environment. But the experts, they've learned to immediately fixate on what matters most: a suspect's hands and their waistband. Why? Because that's where a weapon is most likely to come from. They know exactly what to look for, and they lock right onto it.
And what's so critical here is that this expert gaze, it's not some talent you're just born with. It's a skill. It can be taught. A German police study proved that when you explicitly teach officers these principles of gaze control, their performance gets measurably better. They make fewer mistakes in those critical shoot/don't shoot situations.
And this is where it starts to feel like something out of science fiction. Using this non-invasive tech called FNIR, it stands for Functional Near-Infrared Spectroscopy, instructors can literally get a real-time picture of how an officer's brain is working under pressure. We're moving beyond just judging the outcome to actually understanding the mental process behind the decision.
Okay, so what does this all add up to? I mean, better training is great in theory, but what are the actual, tangible results of this new, science-backed approach?
Well, let's start with the money, because the numbers are pretty staggering. Over a decade, the U.S. Marine Corps projected that by supplementing live-fire training with simulators, they'd see a net savings of over $17 million. So, these new methods, they're not just more effective, they are way, way more efficient.
And the performance gains are just as impressive. Remember that German study on cognitive training? Well, it found that senior officers improved their response times by a whopping 43%. And even the police cadets saw a 26% improvement. They literally became faster, more efficient decision makers.
And it's not just about getting faster, right? It's about being more accurate when the pressure's on. One study showed that after this kind of training, participants became more accurate and made fewer decision errors, even when they were forced to react in just half a second. To put it simply, they got better, not just faster.
But as the science of training gets better and better, it kind of forces us to zoom out and ask some much bigger questions about policy. For context, let's just look at the data comparing different types of jurisdictions. In places like Canada and Australia, where police are routinely armed, the rate of fatal police shootings is 8 times higher than in places like the UK and New Zealand, where they generally are not.
And that really leaves us with one final and pretty provocative thought to chew on. We've just walked through how this new science can make officers more prepared than ever before for these encounters. But it also forces us to ask another question. As you get better and better at training for the fight, is that the only question we should be asking? Thanks for joining The Explainer.